G'day photographers, and welcome to the 5th episode of Tom's Photography Tips. Today we're going to talk about the role that the shutter speed of the camera, the focal length of the lens have in preventing camera shake. Camera shake happens when movement from you or the camera occurs during the exposure and creates an image that is blurry with no point of sharpness. Now, in my previous episode we talked about holding your DSLR properly to help prevent camera shake, but I'm here to tell you the shutter speed and focal length play an even more crucial role in preventing that camera shake. So to start, we're going to go back to the 35mm film SLR days and look at an old rule of thumb that states when you are taking a handheld photograph of a stationary subject, you will have to use a shutter speed equal to or higher than the focal length of the lens to prevent camera shake. Now, that rule still applies today to full-frame DSLRs. That is, a DSLR with a sensor the same size as a 35mm negative. To complicate things, Nikon and Canon make crop-sensored DSLRs which have sensors that are slightly smaller than a full-frame or 35mm negative. With these crop-sensored DSLRs, you will have to apply a crop factor to the given focal length of the lens to convert that to that 35mm full-frame equivalent. Now, Canon has a crop factor with their crop-sensored DSLRs of 1.6 and Nikon has a crop factor of 1.5. So how does that work? Well, for instance, with this Canon 1500D, a crop-sensored DSLR, it has an 18 to 55mm focal length zoom on it. If I set that to say 50mm, I would then have to convert that to the 35mm full frame equivalent so that that rule of thumb can apply to that. So that would mean 50mm times the crop factor of Canon 1.6, which equals 80mm. And that means you need to use a shutter speed of 1/80th of a second or faster to combat camera shake. Now, if that was a Nikon DSLR with a 50mm lens on it, a crop sensor DSLR, you would have to apply a 1.5 crop. Basically the same, but it turns out to be about 75mm. And that means a shutter speed of a 75th of a second or faster to prevent camera shake. Now, as your focal length gets longer, 100mm, 200mm, 400mm, that shutter speed will have to be faster to combat that camera shake. That's because longer focal lengths, which magnify your subject, also magnify your camera shake. So if you're using a 400mm lens, you'll have to use a shutter speed of 1/400th of a second. Or if that 400mm is on a Nikon crop sensor DSLR, 1.5 times 400 is 600. So you'd have to use a 600th of a second on that crop sensor DSLR just to stop your camera shake. Now remember, this rule applies for photographing stationary subjects. If you're photographing action or moving subjects, you will need to use a shutter speed fast enough to freeze that action. But please make sure that that shutter speed is still above the focal length that you are using to combat camera shake. Otherwise, you may still get a blurry photograph. Now, a lot of modern lenses come with image stabilizers. That is, a bank of optics on a gyroscope in the lens which helps prevent camera shake. Canon call it IS, image stabilization, and Nikon call it VR, vibration reduction. These stabilized lenses will allow you to go 1, 2 or 3 shutter speeds below this rule of thumb and still get a nice sharp photo. But everybody's different, remember. Some people are steadier, some people are wobblier, so this rule of thumb again may still apply even if you have the stabilizer on, depending on how shaky you are. Now, one more important point. No matter what focal length lens you're using, or indeed if you're using a lens with an image stabilizer, I don't want you to handhold the camera if the shutter speed drops below 1/30th of a second. You will need to put the camera on a tripod or a solid platform and then use a cable release or the self-timer so you don't touch the camera when you take the picture. This is crucial if you want sharp photos with those slower shutter speeds, particularly if you get down to a 15th, an 1/8th, a 1/4 and slower shutter speeds. You will not get sharp photos holding the camera with those slow shutter speeds. So invest in a tripod. That is the best thing you can do for slow shutter speed photography. Well, I hope you enjoyed this lesson. If you did, please press like and subscribe to my channel. And until then, thank you for watching. And remember, compose, expose, focus, and shoot.